We hear a lot of talk about redefining and rethinking the way we do business in America. But what does that really mean? Author William Holstein is offering up what he calls a blueprint for a real recovery. That's coming up next on UCF Metro Center Outlook.
This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.
Hello everyone, welcome to UCF Metro Center Outlook. I'm Diane, Director of the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies. From policymakers to the unemployed, it seems everyone is struggling with trying to understand what our economy should be. Journalists too are wrestling with that question, which led veteran reporter William Holstein to look for answers. His book, The Next American Economy, examines several models for success, one of which is here in Central Florida. I'll be talking to Bill Holstein just ahead, but first, Alicia Callanan Mandigo gives us a look at Holstein's case study number 3 and the important role business incubators play in that case study.
From the sidewalk, it's not exactly an attention grabber, but the UCF Business Incubator program is recognized as one of the nation's best.
I would suggest that there's not another place in the country and I would say there are a few places in the world that have the kind of incubator network that we've been able to build here in Central Florida.
It has a very sharp focus to it, our model, and that focus is very simple, is help companies be successful.
OptiGrate is a now successful company that came out of UCF's Business Incubator. It designs and manufactures specialized glass that can narrow a laser's wavelength. This technology didn't exist 10 years ago. In the span of a decade, the UCF Business Incubator has helped OptiGrate emerge as an industry leader in sales and manufacturing. The UCF Business Incubator is actually a network of various locations, partnerships, and facilities. This location, for instance, has office space, while this location has laboratory space.
We started the incubator to help spin-off companies from UCF to be successful. And then we had one of those duh moments that said, well, wait a minute, all of the intellect in Central Florida is not concentrated at UCF. Why not assist those people as well if they want to start a company, give them a place in the incubator. So the other part of our approach to the incubator is just to realize that we don't have a monopoly on the intellectual capital of this region and open the incubator up to any entrepreneurs in a community that fits the pattern that we're looking to develop for the community.
The incubator has helped to launch 2 significant industries for Central Florida: optics and photonics, which OptiGrate is part of, and modeling and simulation. To date, 58 companies have graduated from the incubator. Of them, 53 are still in the Central Florida region.
One of the greatest strengths of this region is the commitment that UCF in particular undertook, again, 15 years ago to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem that had as a foundation to it an incubator network.
The UCF Incubator program does see failures, but OptiGrate is now a commercial success. And every success strengthens Central Florida's overall ability to grow and attract new business. Alicia Callanan Mandigo from Metro Center Outlook.
While the business incubator model is an important element in case study number 3, it's only one of several critical elements necessary for success. That's a recurring theme with all of Holstein's case studies. Multiple factors have to come together in order for things to work. Joining me now is Bill Holstein, author of The Next American Economy. Welcome, Bill. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
You've been a foreign correspondent for over 30 years now. What drew you to that occupation and the international arena?
Well, I had a burning sense of curiosity about what was going on in the world, and I was just determined to become a foreign correspondent. I didn't care where, as long as I got someplace outside the United States. And so one day the phone call came. Jimmy Carter had normalized relations with the Chinese, and UPI, United Press International, needed more young people on the ground in Hong Kong. And so I found myself at a very young and tender age watching the Chinese try to come to grips with how could they become more capitalistic, how could they achieve wealth. And so
when was this?
That would be 1979. So that was a very early stage of what was now called globalization. So I've been watching it from the Chinese perspective, the Japanese perspective, Korean perspective, and of course I've also crisscrossed the United States, trying to understand the points of intersection between what's happening in that part of the world and what it means for us. How do we need to respond to that?
You say in the very early pages of the book that America is faced with a triple threat. What are you referring to?
Well, we've been living on a hot money bubble, and so now the bubble has burst. So we need to understand that this is a deep structural problem, and it's not just a business cycle, the routine business cycle that rises and falls. It's a deep structural issue about, and it requires us to make structural responses in our economy. That's one part of it. The other pieces of this deep challenge are that we've allowed our competitive base to be eroded. We have not continued to innovate and get our best ideas out of our idea factories like UCF and get them commercialized in a robust way, fast enough to create as many jobs as we need. We have a huge number of people who need jobs. The third piece of the structural problem is that we're so dependent on Middle East oil and other imported energy that we've not really had a national strategy so to deal with that. So I think that what we can do as a nation is say, let's have a national strategy. I don't think this represents socialism at all. I lived in socialism. I know what real socialism is. I think we should have a national strategy to say, let's create jobs, let's earn more of our own money, and let's ease our dependence on imported energy. I think that's possible.
You talk in the book about a series of case studies that are playing out now successfully in the United States, and those are examples of the new wealth and a way to create a sustainable economy. You use the term cluster. What are you referring to?
Well, clusters refer to Silicon Valley or Route 128 in Boston or Austin, Texas, or San Diego, where they have a biotech and genomics cluster. We've had clusters for many years. I mean, Detroit was an automotive cluster. Toledo was a glass cluster. The cluster concept is where competitors come together and they create a whole infrastructure of suppliers and skills and a dense network of relationships where they get the relationships right with the universities and business and skilled labor base. This is where real economic growth comes from. This is where Americans can achieve a competitive advantage over anybody else in the world.
You say, you use Orlando as case study number 3.
Right.
What makes Orlando an illustration of this cluster concept?
Well, you have a very interesting crossroads effect here between the role of the military and NASA here. And you have large entertainment facilities, Disney, Universal, Electronic Arts is here, and you have a university, UCF, sitting in the middle of that, these cross currents. So you have robust flow of ideas coming out of these idea factories, as I call them. And so you have the capacity here to have 4 different clusters co-located, which could be explosive growth if you could ever manage it just right. You have your simulation and modeling cluster, you have a laser cluster, you have digital entertainment, and you have medical or biotech. So where the real exciting things come from is when different disciplines and different people and different cultures butt up against each other and create new ideas. The trick is, how do you commercialize those ideas? How do you get the ideas out? And how do you create the incubators, but also the venture capital? And how do you build companies?
You talk about the incubators, and that's one of the strengths I think that UCF has brought about. What is it that makes UCF, what have we done right?
Well, incubators often are not really oriented toward equipping an entrepreneur with the skills that they need to get out and go out into the world. Many incubators are oriented toward, we want those people to stay here because we want them to continue to rent the space, and we don't really want them to leave. We want them to continue getting research grant after research grant. And so that actually slows down the formation of a commercially viable enterprise. So you need a very carefully balanced set of incentives. You need to have people in these incubators who are getting good inputs, and so they're meeting CFOs, they're knowing what CEO does, they're learning how to raise money, they're learning how to put together a business plan, and then they're encouraged to go out into the world and take their ideas and do something with them.
So it's a balance for
It's
everybody.
right.
It has an aspect of winning from it.
Right, exactly. It's a win-win situation where the incubator raises money through SBIR, the Small Business Administration,
Yes.
and puts the right people together, and then shoves them out of the nest, so to speak, rather than trying to encourage them to stay in the nest.
It's very difficult to start a company. What are the elements? There are multiple elements that they need to be a success.
It's very tricky. I mean, I think that you can diagram this process and you can divide it into 5 stages. And so at each stage of successful commercialization, you need different people need to be involved. It's really quite difficult. Very rarely does an entrepreneur come out of a university, a professor or a PhD, come out of a university setting and take an idea all the way through to commercialization.
That's not their strong point.
It's not their strong point at all. So they need to constantly build new teams. And then the second thing that always changes is the source of financing keeps changing. In the early stages, when they're still at the university, they can be getting money from the government or from a large business. Then they might go out in stage 1 and get some small business administration funding. And angel capital comes into the picture, maybe foundations in certain cities. But then they have to face the market and they have to face the private sector. Venture capitalists need to be involved. So I mean, this is very tricky to get this right. Each stage of the development of the company, you need different people involved, different flows of money involved, and probably different locations, moving out of a university into a full-fledged office and laboratory setup.
So different areas of expertise.
So at each stage of the development of an idea, you need different kinds of people. And you need an accountant, you need a lawyer, you need a CEO, CFO, you need someone to patent. You need these specialized skills to be around you. And so you need this rich ecosystem, as we call it, of people and institutions that work together to allow the birth of the idea.
Now you use the term ecosystem instead of infrastructure. Why that terminology?
Well, you know, as you look at how do people commercialize technologies, how do Americans learn how to export, how do American community colleges play a successful role in retraining people, many different things that we do in this country. If you diagram and map out all the different people involved in it, no one institution can control it. Central government certainly can't, a state government can't, university can't, private business can't. So what it hinges on is these institutions finding overlaps of interest and cooperating with each other. And the reason the word ecosystem is so good is because there are different politics and different people involved in this, and it's a living thing. So that it is, if you understand the ecosystem and you understand how an idea is successfully commercialized, you can put the pieces in place to allow it to happen. You can't force an idea to be born successfully, but you can certainly put the right ecosystem in place to give somebody a chance to make it work.
So it's not just a physical structure, there's a lot more to it. And you actually call it a secret sauce in the book. Right. You say that it's not enough just to have PhDs in a room generating ideas. What do you mean by that secret sauce?
Well, it's this wisdom and the knowledge about how do you create not just the PhDs in a room or put up a new building with cranes. You need to create the soft connective tissue that allows those great brains in those great buildings to get the ideas out into the community and to the state. So that requires real knowledge and real wisdom, because you just can't throw a switch and say, now we're going to have entrepreneurship, now we're going to create ideas. It requires working with many different constituencies to encourage them, to give them all incentives to become players in this ecosystem.
When the secret sauce works, you say it brings academia, venture capital, and industry together, and that is a unique aspect of American culture that is not part of a lot of the other foreign cultures that you see. Right. What competitive advantage? Why do we have that?
Well, we have a unique ability to do disruptive technological change. We've done the laser, the transistor, on, biotech industry, the internet. We have this capacity in this country to disrupt, to come up with something that no one else can do. So the key to it is how ideas come out of our idea factories, create ecosystems, multiple ecosystems, create these clusters. This is what no one else in the world can do. The Chinese can't do it. I've studied this in China. The Chinese have tremendous limitations because the Communist Party is in control, in charge. And you can't do anything unless the party thinks it's a good idea. They're very primitive in terms
You
of.
better not fail.
You can't allocate capital. They have no way to match capital up with good ideas. This is a very unique thing we do. If someone has a good idea, we know how to match capital to that idea and to give it birth. They can't do that because everything is directed from the central government. So if we as Americans can unleash our own capacities, there's no one in the world who can touch us. We do this better than anyone else in the world.
You talk about Cleveland is one of your case studies, and they were successful at training and retraining.
Right.
That concept of using their educational institutions to match what the manufacturing needs are and put that in a curriculum. With Florida, we've got a displaced group of highly skilled workers coming out of the space industry, but we also have a large contingency of construction workers, hospitality workers. How do they fit in with no technical skill training? How do they fit into this model?
Well, the community colleges are absolutely essential to any state or region's efforts to raise your technology base because they are uniquely capable of hooking up or connecting to what employers really want and then providing the classwork to people who are willing to go through a retraining process to gear themselves up. Basically, the fact that the bubble has burst means a lot of the people in the construction and hospitality trades are never going to find those jobs again. They're not coming back. So how do those people, particularly people in their 40s or 50s, how do they get retooled? The community colleges are overwhelmingly the answer, much better than private universities, private for-profit universities. Employers don't want to do it. The government can't do it. The government is just not smart enough to do it. So community colleges are able to create relationships, create an ecosystem with businesses that are trying to find people. And those businesses will sit on advisory committees that create curriculum. They'll provide professors. They'll provide equipment into the community college. And so then the people who are trying to reposition themselves can go take a class. Maybe there are different grades. You can take one for 6 months or you can go as long as 2 years. It depends. But you have a realistic chance of getting a piece of paper that will lead you to a job that really exists out there rather than getting a piece of paper, a diploma, and not being able to find a job. So this is a critical piece of what you're trying to do here in Central Florida.
We are very fortunate to have a community college system that really works well together. So I think that that's a very good model. And I know that parts of it, they're already doing that here. In the book, you talk about America has gone from a manufacturing-based economy to a service-based economy, and that is imperative that we get back to a manufacturing base. Why is that so important? And what is it about manufacturing? It's a different kind of manufacturing that you're referring to.
Yeah, I don't mean that we have to go back to large-scale steel or large-scale industries of the sort we had in the past. We need to defend, our auto industry and our construction, our John Deeres and Caterpillars. They need to continually update themselves. But what we need are new waves of industry. In Pittsburgh, they have advanced robotics coming out there.
Carnegie Mellon.
Carnegie Mellon. They have San Diego. They have genomics, and bioinformaticists they need there. Here you have a simulation and modeling industry. It's not creating manufacturing jobs, but it is creating jobs. You have 100 companies, last count, doing simulation, modeling, and training. That's a boom industry if you could develop that and roll that out. So these kinds of activities are what we need. We became too much of a consumption-based society, not necessarily a service-based society, but at one point, 67% of our whole economy was consumer spending. That's way out of proportion. We need to have a much higher percentage of productive activity in our society because that's what guarantees wealth over the long term. Those kinds of jobs are sustainable. The Japanese, the Germans, the people who are most successful in the world know that if you have very high-value niches in manufacturing and you have trained people to do that, and those products are needed all around the world, that you have a high degree of sustainability. You can protect those jobs against the economic dips and economic vagaries. when you have service sector activity and consumption-based activity, that can go away.
You're very vulnerable.
But
as we've seen.
casinos and entertainment facilities and hotels and retail all have been dependent on robust flows of hot money, on our ability to borrow money. But now that it's much more difficult to borrow money, those forms of economic activity are going to suffer for a long time.
How would you advise our students, our younger students now, what curriculums that they should be looking at to prepare for this economic sustainable wealth? And where do we start? Do we go back to high schools? Do we go to middle schools?
Well, I mean, the entire educational system in this country has challenges. I mean, I think we all know that. So we need to figure out a way to encourage our children to go for more science and technology and math and engineering. Those are the jobs that are going to be defensible. A lot of children, including my own, were reluctant to go down that path because they feared competing against the Indians or the Chinese. But it is possible to do it, and so. But part of it is the culture that surrounds them. We have Dancing with the Stars and we have American Idol, but we don't have any shows about So You Think You Can Compute or come up here and solve mathematical problems with celebrities. So our whole culture encourages our young people to not really be serious about these tougher subjects. So it's a challenge for all of us. You can't point a finger and say so-and-so has failed. I mean, we as a system, as a society, have to believe that these things are important.
So it's a culture shift again.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of government. Part of the book, you really emphasize collaboration and streamlining, and you talk about the role that we're fragmented with a lot of government agencies. And an example of this, the trade legislation is handled in the House by the Ways and Means Committee. You have immigration by the Judiciary Committee, government spending by appropriation and budget committees. They're all chaired by powerful legislators who have their own agendas. How do we work past that to look at what's best for the country? We do not have a successful track record. Politics has intervened.
I'm a big believer that we've allowed our political process to become too polarized, and that we have people on one goal line in a football field, one goal line screaming, we have the solution, we're a Tea Party, or we believe we need to get government out of the economy. And the other goal line 100 yards away are people screaming, government has all the answers, we're liberals or we're Democrats. I think the vast majority of Americans are someplace between the two 40-yard lines, maybe even have 1 foot on either side of the 50-yard line, fiscal, conservative, socially liberal. I mean, the solutions to what we have, to the problems we have in this society and in our economy depend on finding middle of the road, pragmatic solutions, doing things that work. This polarization is preventing us from coming to grips with our real economic challenges. So, yeah, so aside from politics, even within the government, the U.S. government, for example, take the idea of promoting exports. We have the U.S. Department of Commerce is supposed to be doing that with their Foreign Commercial Service. Then the Small Business Administration is supposed to help finance those exports. The Ex-Im Bank is supposed to help do that. Yet they are not always coordinated among themselves, and they don't always coordinate with state and Department of Commerce's. And then there are other hurdles we put in the way of exporters. We have 3 different agencies at the federal level involved in approving any kind of technology export, state, commerce, and the Pentagon. So we need to look at our government ecosystem, our government infrastructure for promoting exports, and try to streamline that and try to make it more affordable and easier for small and medium-sized companies to get into that game. That's just one example. We need to look at government as a facilitator of the kinds of economic activities we need in this country to regain our lost footing and to maintain our living standards, our position in the world.
You talk about the need for a cohesive economic strategy and industrial policy, and in fact you give some specific recommendations of where you would like to see U.S. policy headed. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
This phrase, industrial policy, is really a loaded phrase, and it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Many people think it's pork barrel, that it refers to giving money to political pals. But it doesn't. A smart industrial policy as opposed to a dumb industrial policy, if we had a smart policy, the government would say, we spend $150 billion a year in R&D. They do. $150 billion a year is spent by the federal government through a variety of different agencies. That money is scattered through all sorts of different states and regions and scattered across many different technologies. It's not coordinated. It's focused overwhelmingly on basic research research, it ought to be, in my view, the government ought to come together, and President Obama or his successor ought to say, what is our strategy with this $150 billion? Should we be spending it on key technologies that will define our future, maybe 10 or 12? Should we concentrate 10% or 15% more on not just having the basic research go on in the idea factories, but help commercialize that, give a little bit more emphasis to stage 2 and stage 3 of the successful commercialization model. So within existing funding of the federal government, they would have the capacity to do a lot better for us and without costing a single penny more.
Shifting around a little bit more effective and
improving the coordination of it. One of the obvious goals should be more energy independence. We should have a sustained national focus on solar and wind. At a bare minimum, we shouldn't be allowing the Chinese to eat our lunch on that, or the Germans, or anyone else. That is an industry of the future, and we ought to have an integrated, focused strategy to win in solar.
One last question we have time for. What case studies were considered for this book that didn't make it in, and might there be a book 2?
Well, the case studies I chose were trying to get a geographic representation of East and West, and red states and blue states, North and South. I wanted to demonstrate that the lessons about being able to understand how growth occurs and how it is created, that's not dependent on regional variations in our country. So that's why I have San Diego and Austin and Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and as well as the industrial Midwest and Northeast. So there are many more case studies out there to be had, I'm sure. And so if this book does well and there's demand, and you do so well, then I'll come back and write another one.
I look forward to reading
Great.
it. That was an excellent book, very insightful and very understandable for someone who does not have a foreign correspondent background. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I've been talking to author Bill Holstein about his views on how our country should rethink its approach to building wealth and creating jobs. If the Great Recession has proven anything, it has certainly proven that our economy is inextricably intertwined with that of the world's. And so, Bill Holstein will be joining me again for a look at our economy against a global backdrop. Bill's website offers a plethora of additional ideas and information. Please check it out. Also visit the newly revamped Metro Center website. Give me your feedback. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Diane Trees with UCF Metro Center Outlook.
This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.